After securing victory at Corfinium, Julius Caesar set his sights on a strategic objective, Brundisium, a key port in southern Italy. This city held immense significance for both military and political reasons. Pompey, Caesar's principal rival, had retreated to Brundisium with his forces, planning to use it as a launching point to escape across the Adriatic Sea to Greece. From there, Pompey intended to rally more troops and consolidate his position, preparing for a longer confrontation with Caesar. Caesar, determined to trap Pompey and force a decisive battle, moved swiftly to lay siege to the port city. As Caesar approached Brundisium, he understood the gravity of the situation. Pompey was one of Rome's most formidable commanders, and allowing him to escape would prolong the war and potentially swing momentum in Pompey's favour. Caesar's plan was straightforward: encircle the city, build fortifications, and prevent Pompey's forces from fleeing by sea. By doing so, he hoped to force Pompey into a direct confrontation on Roman soil, where Caesar's legions would have the upper hand. However, Pompey was no ordinary opponent. He had already assessed his situation, recognizing that Brundisium, while strategically important, was not defensible long-term, given Caesar's speed and the size of his army. Pompey had already ordered his engineers to fortify the city, but his true goal was not to hold Brundisium indefinitely. Instead, he intended to use the city as a temporary stronghold while preparing his fleet for a swift evacuation. Upon his arrival, Caesar ordered his engineers to begin the construction of siege works. Fortifications were erected around the city to cut off supply lines and reinforce the blockade. The walls of Brundisium were formidable, and Pompey's forces were well prepared to hold off Caesar's initial assaults. Caesar, a veteran of numerous sieges during his Gallic campaigns, knew this would be no easy task. Nevertheless, he pressed forward, directing his legions to cut off all routes of escape and surrounding the city with a sense of urgency. The days turned into weeks as the siege dragged on. Caesar's men worked tirelessly, building earthworks and trenches to isolate the city. Pompey, on the other hand, launched several sorties from within the city to disrupt Caesar's progress. These sudden, calculated attacks caused brief confusion among the besieging forces, but Caesar's troops quickly reformed and repelled the assaults. Pompey's goal wasn't to break the siege entirely, but to delay Caesar long enough for his escape plans to come to fruition. As the tension mounted, Caesar grew increasingly anxious. His primary concern was that Pompey might slip away, which would force Caesar into a prolonged conflict in foreign lands. Time was running out, and Caesar knew it. He pushed his legions to work faster, ordering them to construct a blockade in the harbour, intending to trap Pompey's fleet in the port. Caesar's forces began building a series of floating barricades to close off the harbour's entrance. This move was both ambitious and risky, as it required speed and precision to complete before Pompey could make his move. Despite Caesar's efforts, Pompey's preparations for evacuation were nearly complete. His fleet, one of the largest and most experienced in the Roman world, was ready to sail. Pompey had already begun loading his troops and supplies onto the ships under the cover of night. His engineers had also destroyed parts of the city's walls, creating a barrier of rubble that would slow down any attempt by Caesar's forces to breach the city and reach the docks. The siege reached its climax as Pompey ordered the final evacuation of his forces. With a carefully timed manoeuvre, Pompey's fleet sailed out of Brundisium's harbour just as Caesar's forces were completing their blockade. Caesar's legions, witnessing the escape, rushed to the docks, but it was too late. Pompey and his army had successfully slipped away, leaving Caesar standing at the water's edge, watching his enemies sail toward Greece. Caesar's frustration was palpable. Despite all his efforts, Pompey had outmaneuvered him, escaping to fight another day. The war, which Caesar had hoped to end quickly with a decisive victory at Brundisium, would now drag on across the Adriatic in a foreign land where Pompey's influence was strong. Nevertheless, Caesar remained undeterred. While Pompey had escaped, Caesar now controlled all of Italy. The Senate's forces had been driven out, and Caesar's position as the dominant power in Rome was solidified. His next step would be to pursue Pompey to Greece and force a confrontation on foreign soil. The significance of the siege of Brundisium cannot be understated. Although Pompey had managed to escape, the siege represented a turning point in Caesar's campaign. It demonstrated Caesar's resolve and his willingness to pursue his enemies wherever they fled. It also highlighted Pompey's strategic brilliance, as he managed to escape from under Caesar's nose, preserving his forces for the battles to come. As Caesar prepared his legions for the coming campaign in Greece, the larger conflict between Caesar and Pompey took on new dimensions. The struggle was no longer just about control of Rome. It was about control of the entire Roman world. With both leaders determined to emerge victorious, the siege of Brundisium was just the beginning of a conflict that would reshape the Roman Republic and determine the fate of its greatest leaders. After the siege, Pompey fled to Greece, where he began gathering reinforcements and preparing for a larger conflict with Caesar. Meanwhile, Caesar wasted no time. With Italy firmly under his control, he turned his attention to assembling a fleet to follow Pompey across the Adriatic. Caesar's confidence was unshaken, despite the frustrations at Brundisium. He knew that the ultimate confrontation with Pompey was inevitable, and when it came, it would be one of the defining moments of his career. The siege of Brundisium marked the end of the first phase of Caesar's civil war. While Pompey's escape was a setback, Caesar's rapid conquest of Italy was a testament to his strategic brilliance and his ability to inspire loyalty in his troops. The war was far from over, but Caesar had already demonstrated that he was a force to be reckoned with. The next phase of the war would take Caesar to Greece, where he would confront Pompey in a series of battles that would determine the future of Rome. In retrospect, the siege of Brundisium can be seen as a microcosm of the larger conflict between Caesar and Pompey. It was a battle of wits and strategy, with each commander attempting to outmaneuver the other. While Pompey ultimately escaped, the siege set the stage for the coming clashes that would decide the fate of the Roman Republic. For Caesar, it was both a lesson in the difficulty of war and a stepping stone toward greater victories to come. With Pompey's escape, the war would now spread across the Mediterranean, drawing in more cities, more legions, and more bloodshed. Caesar, always the opportunist, was ready for the challenge. His pursuit of Pompey would become the defining feature of the next phase of the war, leading to some of the most famous and decisive battles in Roman history. Brundisium had been the first test, but the war was only just beginning.